Welcome to another Word in Your Ear. Now, most music books tell stories about the people who make the music, but this terrific book that Dave and I have both just read, called The Sound of Being Human, is about the emotional impact of music. It's about the things that it makes us feel and think and do. And the emotional impact of meeting some of your childhood heroes later in life, in this case, Adam Ant, Michael Stipe, and various others. And we're joined by its author, our old pal from Word Magazine, Jude Rogers. Jude, it's lovely to see you.
Hello, Jude.
You. Hello, both of you.
It's like being back in the office, isn't it, Jude?
It is. I wonder if you've read the bits in which I mention you yet.
Well, we have. Yes, we thought very
He always
flatteringly.
goes straight to them. You know.
We have. I know there's no index, so we couldn't have just checked straight away.
He is a man who goes into Waterstones all the time and searches the contents pages of
me.
How your indexes? I mean,
no.
Hoping you're going to be there, or dreading that you're going to be there.
It's very flattering. No, Jude, it's brilliant. So that must have taken care of a lot of your Welsh lockdown.
Yes, absolutely. I'd sent the proposal in about 3 weeks before lockdown 1, and then for the first month of lockdown, I really wasn't finding any great solace in music because of the madness of that time. And so I was like, oh God, I just sent this proposal in about how a book about how music is so amazing and transportive.
And now I suddenly hate it.
But thankfully that became chapter 12. That became the last chapter about how you could have come out with that. But yeah, it did. Yeah. So mainly wrote in 2021, really. You know,
yeah.
But
it's a very, very different, and it's a very original approach. So what were you trying to achieve with the idea of it? Explain what the point of it is. Well,
I think I've written about music personally a lot over the years in fits and starts, and elements of some of those pieces, you know, came together in this. There's a piece I wrote about my childhood heroes for Word years ago, which I took some inspiration from my Adam Ant chapter. Yeah. But I think, you know, when I started, I used to really, really love writing personally about music, but I wasn't asked often to do it for obvious reasons. You're a critic, you've got to be objective, you're interviewing somebody, you can't write about, you know, when you fancied them when you were 12, you know, you've got to be professional. But I thought there's so much else that goes into our relationship with music. And I'm a fan as well as a journalist, and I wanted to document that. And also I noticed that people really responded to pieces that I wrote that were personal about my love of music. There's a piece I wrote after Mark Hollis of Talk died in 2019, and it was your classic called in the evening. I was in a lay-by in my car. Mark Hollis has died, write something by tomorrow morning. And I wrote something very much from the heart, and I got so much response from that. And after that, I realized people want to read this stuff because we all have our own 12 songs. Like my book is structured around 12 songs that have shaped my life. We all have our own version of those 12 songs, whatever they are. And so if I tell my story about my life through my songs, and actually dig in a bit to, you know, why do songs take us back, you know, far away into our childhoods or to, you know, far distant experiences? You know, why do we still cling to songs from our teenagers? Are there reasons for that? So I used that as a way of, you know, asking very clever people much cleverer than me, you know, how these things worked. Because I knew, you know, Mark, you and Dave, and everybody who listens to this will have songs of theirs which are completely, you know, transporting or comforting.
It's so interesting. You talk very early on in the book about this. There's two songs particularly was Only You by the Flying Pickets, which reminds you of your late pa.
Yeah.
And I think it's Super Trooper by ABBA, which is your first ever kind of memory. So what is it, do you think, that is so powerful about the way music connects you with things, more so than pictures or films? Is it entirely because there's no information, it's just entirely about an emotional reaction? Do you think that's something to do with it?
It's partly emotion, but it's the way the emotion fires up your brain.
Yeah.
You know, I've interviewed quite a few psychologists and neuroscientists for this book, and I found that so fascinating, talking about how, you know, very, very early on in our lives, a song can be remembered by, you know, very well. I knew that from my own experiences that a song could be remembered by a small child. But I started looking into studies. I found this amazing study about this test on a group of babies who were played a song in the womb, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I won't go into the huge details of this study, but essentially the babies' played a specific version of Twinkle Twinkle Star often when their mothers were pregnant, remembered it at birth and remembered it at 4 months. And we know that because they had these little caps of electrodes put on their heads, and these little, they were scanned to see how different parts of the brain responded, and they remembered. So it's something about that emotional connection with various parts of your brain. The dopamine that surges through our brains when we experience pleasure is activated by music. So it was going a bit deeper into that emotional connection. Some people just think, there's this theory that I talk about in the book about music being auditory cheesecake.
Let's go on about this.
Yeah. And it's been a kind of, and this is Steven Pinker, the very well-known scientist, and he dismisses anything beyond that. But other people working in that field say, well, why is music and its impact lasted in evolutionary time? Why haven't we evolved away from music, really? I just found that really fascinating. So it's a combination of how emotion can make all these different parts of our brain work. And the more I asked people, the more I found out about how very different parts of the brain work. And there's lots of references to, the prefrontal cortex, et cetera, which I had to get fact checked, as you can imagine, today, having got a single award science GCSE. But I tried to describe, those reactions and those neural conversations, as the phrase goes, in simple language so people could understand that. It's one thing I find really, really fascinating is, every time we have a reaction to something, a unique set of neurons fires in our brain. And so if you hear a song, say, when I hear the first song I remember with any great clarity, the first thing I remember with any great clarity after my father dying is Freedom by Wham. And I found out that, you hear that song again, and it's a pattern of a very unique pattern in your brain is fired up again. And the more it's fired up, you get all these different sensations go on in that pattern. And it's not just hearing the song, it's where you are, it's the place you are, it's the sensory information, deepens that memory. So it's very, very powerful. And music activates more parts of our brain than lots of other similar sensory things do.
What's the role played in all this by repetition? Because one of the reasons we remember music so well is when we hear it hundreds of times, don't we? You know what I mean? Whereas, we always say this, people who went to hear Beethoven's Fifth for the first time never expected to hear it again in their lives. Whereas anything you hear nowadays, particularly nowadays, can be recaptured, immediately. And so surely a lot of our relationship with music must be just with a sheer amount of repetition that we've been exposed to, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's that imprinting of that pattern of neurons that go off in your brain. But what I found interesting is when you hear songs by accident as well. And so there's repetition of you hearing it, of course, but there's this surprise, and then you're anticipating what's coming next. And I look into theories of anticipation in music, how part of the pleasure when we hear a song that we love, or we replay a song that we love, is us anticipating what comes next and us knowing what comes next. So we get this kind of pleasure and satisfaction from the elements of our anticipation being met, really.
Right.
God, it's so true. I can hear something that I haven't heard for 40 years, and I know every note of the guitar solo or whatever.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
really pleasurable.
And it's incredibly pleasurable. You feel really exhilarated. It's extraordinary.
And it's simultaneously extraordinary that you can listen to records for 40 years and not really have any curiosity about what the lyrics actually are. You've just arrived at some version yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then 40 years later, you read it and think, oh my God, oh really? Oh, I'll tell you what. I heard it thousands of times, and you have never heard any more in it. I've repeated that first listening is what I've done. I've done the same thing again and again, interestingly.
I think what's interesting, obviously, through my life and my work, there's songs like Super Trooper by ABBA, which I heard and loved as a child. And then years later, I wrote the script for Jarvis Cocker for this Super Troopers exhibition in London South Bank Centre. You know, he was the audio guide.
He was the voice of the thing, wasn't he? That's right.
He was. So and then I had to dig into these songs in different ways. And, you know, when I started really liking ABBA again in my 20s, after, you know, I was an indie kid in my teens and, you know, did like pop music for a while like an idiot. I remember really, you know, finding out more about the story behind, you know, where ABBA were in, you know, 1981, which wasn't a particularly nice place. But yeah, Freedom by Wham, as you say, Dave, that's a song I absolutely love. And I've learned about the lyrics subsequently, but I have no real interest in them. You know, the story they tell is not of interest to me. What is of interest to me is basically if it comes on in a club or a birthday party or a wedding disco, that bridge to the chorus where, you know, George Michael is singing Once, Twice, Forever, and I've got to find my friend Catherine and we've got to do the moves. And that's what it is. It's about, you know, you take little bits of it that mean something to you. And sometimes it can be the melody, can, you know, and I talked to a musicologist about, you know, why we respond to certain melodies and how a lot of songwriting is about, you know, it's about repetition, but then it's about surprising you in the middle of that and songwriting. Rewriting the rules. It's really interesting.
It's a combination of familiarity and strangeness, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's just it's getting those two things in the right proportions.
It is, which everyone says is the key thing to a hit record.
I'm sure it is.
I can't remember what percent it has. 70% of it has to be familiar and 30% has to be new. But 70%, that means that it's got to have a chord sequence that you once heard in a Beatles song or something, but you don't realise that consciously. Really. So
you say everybody's got their 12 songs. Did you have your 12 when waiting?
I had, well, when I hated the idea, I did have a 12 songs, but they changed. And I do say in the book, you know, this book could be a completely different set of 12 songs. In my last chapter, I talk about the sort of artifice around that, you know, what am I trying to tell? And, you know, we use music to tell our own stories. And that is basically what I'm doing in this book. I wanted to have a range of songs. I wanted to not repeat myself in different chapters. I wanted to cover different areas. You know, I wanted to have, you know, not just, you know, 12 songs by girl groups. I wanted to have some variety and diversity. You know, I remember quite, you know, not that late on in the writing process, but suddenly realizing, you know, I'm a big fan of folk music and traditional music, and I didn't have any song there. But there was a chapter I was writing and it was pushing me towards Shirley Collins. And I was like, well, you should make it about Shirley Collins because that's, and I suddenly thought, you know, that is the way this is going. So I followed it. So,
well, that's a lovely bit in the book where you, as a kind of exercise, I think for a piece of The Guardian, you decided to perform a song, didn't you, at the Cecil Sharp house in public. To see, to kind of, what did you learn from that experience about what it was like to actually perform? Because I think Shirley Collins was involved with that, wasn't she? Yeah,
she was. Yeah, I was actually commissioned to. I wasn't commissioned to do that. It was an idea from a publicist actually for the Sidmouth Folk Festival, which is you know your traditional week-long seaside folk festival where you learn singing, you learn all this stuff, and they came to me and I was like, yes, definitely, I want to do this. So I had to learn.
Full marks to the publicist who came up with that idea.
That's a really good idea.
Because you know, how often does a publicist come up with a workable idea?
Yeah, that was Tim.
Hardly ever.
That was Tim Chipping, who used to be in a Romo band.
Good work from Tim.
Well done, Tim. So I went to some ballad singing classes at Sidmouth Folk Festival, at the Sidmouth Folk Festival, and I asked Shirley Collins to nominate a song for me to learn to sing, which is quite terrifying, but she's lovely. And she suggested a song called Gilderoy, which meant a lot to her, and it's, you know, hundreds of years old. You know, the source material takes you back.
Yeah.
And she was telling me about how you sing how to sing a song like that, about how to try and just get across this story that's been told for hundreds of years, but without artifice and without narcissism and without, you know, putting some Mariah Carey, you know, melisma on top and that kind of thing. Making it feel real, but, you know, making it connect with people. And Shirley is this amazing. She is like a sage-like woman in some ways, but she's also very cheeky and very lovely and quite, very naughty. She's always flirting with my husband. I don't mind, neither does he. But she's wonderful. But, you know, my friendship with her, I write about a bit. You know, this is a woman who went across America in the late 50s with Alan Lomax.
Yeah, Alan Lomax.
Some of the songs that were on the O Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack, some of the songs that came back and helped really influence blues singers. And people like Mississippi Fred McDowell.
She turned up with Mississippi Fred McDowell's place in Mississippi.
Yeah.
which must have been the other side of the world for somebody coming from the south coast of the UK.
She didn't get a lot of credit for all that, poor old thing. She
didn't, but I think that time has changed now. She's kind of written
I think
memoirs, and it's
she's outlived.
Yeah.
She has lived.
She has. No, she has. So there's a bit about. I wanted to ask you about the bit about you talking about how the teenage brain develops and how this relates to our obsessions about pop stars, because you talk about obsession a lot. It's really interesting stuff by Michael Stipe and Adam Ant. So what was it? I've got to ask you, because Dave and I were at Smash Hits at the time of Adam Ant, so we saw him as someone. How can we present this person to 12-year-old girls? Well, you probably were a 10 or 12-year-old girl at the time.
Adam Ant, I was very little. Michael Stipe, I was 14, 15. So Adam Ant, I just responded to him like a amazing cartoon character. He looked like somebody out of a fairy tale. His amazing outfit. It was specifically the video to Prince Charming, which I write about in the book, which had a massive effect on me. And Diana Dawes as the fairy godmother.
Diana Dawes, of course.
Yes, she's in it. That's right. Yeah.
And like rewriting this fairy tale in a very different way. Well, he was beautiful and he was ostentatious. And the songs were amazing. I remember the sound of Prince Charming when I first heard it. So feral and the yowls in it. It was just.
It is.
It took me away from Wham to something
tribal
else.
Drums. Yeah, exactly.
So, Michael Stipe, I was.
Well, R.E.M. You talk about them being an education. I mean, in what way were they an education? It was really interesting.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking of me being in the Word office, and I loved R.E.M. then, and I think just think of Andrew Harrison in the corner going, "Oh, bloody R.E.M.'s, bloody Americans."
They does that about everybody.
Tommy Techno. No. R.E.M. were. Well, yeah, they were just mysterious, and they were very unlike anything I'd come across. Really, my entry point to them was a history teacher in school who used to play his tapes on wet break time and try and kind of like avoid us kids, trying to, steal stuff. But I basically begged him until he made me a copy of it, which is awful, for being begged by a 14-year-old to make you a copy of a tape. And then I just kind of went on this rabbit hole with him, really. I love Michael Stipe's voice. I loved their videos. They were kind of arty and weird and mysterious and strange. But I started to learn a lot about, all kinds of things. They talk about the art of Man Ray. They talked about, Michael Stipe.
One of those groups that were just very outward looking, weren't they? It was kind of. It's like, Bruce Springsteen, or it's like even Paul Weller, people like that. There are certain acts who are kind of outward looking. And so when they give interviews, they talk about the world.
They talk about,
and then there are a lot of acts who don't talk about the world at all. They just talk about their record.
Yeah, they always talk about books and films and philosophy. Yeah. It's really interesting. A lot of people thought they were educated by that.
Yeah. And then when you're a teenager, your brain is developing so rapidly. And I was interested to find out, this is only something that neuroscientists have realized in the last 20 years. So you've got these parts of our brain that altogether are known as our social brain. So they're developing the way we understand and empathize with people outside our small family unit. We're learning to kind of respond to faces that are outside our family unit. And a lot of this stuff is to do with evolution and trying not to, so you're not incestuous with your family. It's trying to push you away from them. But also you've got the what's called the dopamine pathway, which is, the rushes of emotion kind of all kicking in. And the control center in the very front of your brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex. I love just saying all these terms.
It's good.
In school. But that's how we're responsible for controlling our behavior. But it's not quite up to speed with what's going on elsewhere. There's this brilliant analogy that one of the neuroscientists I kind of refer to talks about, which is like, it's like we've got a steering wheel, but we can't control it. We're going, we've got this fast car and the steering wheel's wonky and it won't really work. And we're going, this is really exciting, but we could crash at any moment. But we are just being thrown towards these other faces, and they don't have to be, the face of a boy in your class or a girl in your class. It can be the face of Michael Stipe on the video to Drive, which I was obsessed with. I was obsessed with this video as a kid. And I interviewed the director who made the video, and I could go into detail about the song, and then I'd talk about when I met Michael Stipe years later, which is a bit of a, family, one of those stories that always makes people, my friends and family, laugh. I interviewed him in...
you said it was a bigger event than getting married to your husband.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And he accepts this. He accepts it. Yeah.
Yeah, bless him. Yeah, what was the best thing that happened to you this year? I met Michael Stipe. What about us getting married in April? We're still together. What can I say?
Yeah.
Michael Stipe definitely would not run off with me. I kind of realised that after a while, He has other interests in that area. But but it's quite interesting thinking about how
you met Adam Ant as well, though. You meet Adam Ant in the course.
Very briefly, not as a journalist.
And you weren't aware it was him.
Doesn't matter.
He had a big hat on, and he was kind of rather in disguise, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in the corner of a room. This was
a Tony Bennett reception or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not where you'd expect to see him. Yeah, I'd gone to review Tony Bennett for The Guardian, and afterwards I was, hobnobbing downstairs with various journalists, drinking free glasses of wine and the like. And a journalist called Simon Price, who I'm sure you all know, with his famous, pink horns of hair, was in the corner with a pal. And it turned out to be this kind of quite shy guy in a hat who was Adam Ant. And we kind of caught eyes at the end, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I since found out that the piece I wrote for Word many years ago, he had read, Simon had given it to him. And I'm going to send my book to Adam when I get my final copies. So I hope he was really inspiring.
Adam will have read everything, won't he?
Yeah, I hope so.
He will.
He will.
One of those kind of people.
And it must be so bizarre to be in that position that, you'll be talking to some people who have no idea who you are. You're talking to some people who know who you are and probably didn't ever like you and rather, disparaging. And then you're talking to people like you who are completely overcome. And you've got to kind of make an adjustment to all of those people.
Oh, yeah. And running upstairs, calling my mum, it's like 11:15 on a school night. And I think she might have been still working. She's retired now. Going, Mum, you never kiss on me. I was like 33 at the time.
Oh dear. So who's your greatest disappointment of the people you've met?
Oh, that's a good question. Disappointment. I did meet him. I interviewed him on the phone. Alex Turner of the Arctic Monkeys was incredibly rude.
In what way? Just uncooperative?
Oh, he was just like, doing this. The act he put on, it just reminded me about, when John Lennon was at his most surly.
Yeah.
He thought he was trying to kind of, be that. And in the end, I just ended up giving him what I call a Welsh mam telling off. You didn't have to do this interview, Alex. Yeah, you didn't have to.
Yes. That's always the thing, isn't it? They hire PRs to set up these things and then pretend that they had nothing to do with it. That's the thing that always scares me.
I remember at one point he went, "You're not enjoying this, are you, Jude?" And that's when I went, "No, I'm not, because you're being very rude."
Rude is the word.
No. How about people who've really impressed you? Who have you come away? Who have you been really knocked out with?
Oh, goodness.
Told you something really illuminating.
Shirley is one. Neneh Cherry, who I also write about in the book. Oh, I love Neneh Cherry. She's so great. She sort of exists on another planet. She's so, artistic and slightly hippie-ish. And but she was somebody who had a big effect on, I think, lots of young girls in the late 80s. Yeah. She had a life that was so completely different to mine. I was
pregnant on Top of the Pops or something.
Pregnant on Top of the Pops.
I thought that was pretty fantastic, actually.
Yeah, and I remember seeing it, and obviously I'm sure you're aware of the Top of the Pops reruns that have been going on BBC 4 now for quite some years, and it's been amazing the last 5 years just watching my late childhood and adolescence, because I've still been watching them and watching the episode when suddenly Neneh Cherry is on in the middle, thinking, I remember this from the time, and she's got Kim Wilde and Kylie either side of her, who I loved then, but Neneh Cherry was just something completely out there.
Yeah.
I'll have to be honest, I've not seen these things at all. What are they rerunning? The whole episode?
Oh, Dave. So this is for my generation, I guess, more. So they about 11, I think it's 11 or 12 years ago now. Yeah,
they just take 1 year, don't they?
No. They run it week by week.
That's what I mean. They work through chronologically. Yeah.
So they started when the tapes were available. So I think it was 76. This was about 11 or 12 years ago. We're now in 1992. So I'm 14, you know, kind of in my head when I'm watching these things. It's massive lockdown thing for me and my friends. So friends of mine, you know, I live in Wales now, but friends in London and elsewhere, we have a WhatsApp group that when we are all in on a Friday night now, which is obviously less than it was 2 years ago. No, sure. We just watch it and WhatsApp each other at the same time. So we're making rude comments about Carter USM or R.E.M and they're not. Or, you know, there's when Bryan Adams was #1 for 15 weeks, you know, we were all moaning about that. But it's all the kind of like cheap DIY rave records are in the chart.
So do you get 15 weeks of Bryan Adams at #1?
Yeah, you do. Well, no,
it's in real time, isn't it? That's right. Yeah.
It's you get two episodes every week. So you get 2 weeks,
right.
And you do miss out some weeks because there are.
I got to say that 15 weeks was quite tedious at the time. I can't imagine what it's like when you relive it. You know, no disrespect to Bryan Adams, but you know, anything that's #1 for 15 weeks.
It's really fascinating. It's really fascinating to watch just because you think about there are certain artists that are always on and you think, right, there's a record plugger here who knows somebody, you know, behind the scenes. Or, you know, Michael Jackson always gets his, you know, those interminable long videos, you know, played in full, which take up half the program. And
right.
And you still get some of the DJs, don't you, I think? So have they been edited out? Are you getting Woo Gary Davis and stuff?
We've passed that era now. We're on Tony Doughty and lots of young people. The young faces are starting to break through because, you know, dance music has come along now. And they're trying to kind of make it more hip and happening. So, but yeah, it's really fun. So
is it all full of presenters nowadays that nobody remembers? I'm not nowadays, but from, you know, like you say, from the 90s or whatever. Top of the box presenters, nobody remembers them. Is that right?
There's a guy called Tony Doughty who's a black guy I think he's from East London, possibly. And he's been tweeting along to them recently. He's a presenter in America now.
Right.
We all remember him, but the others were like, no idea. Couldn't really remember them. But
I suppose it's multi-channel TV, isn't it? By then, you know, you're no longer getting 23 million people watching it, I suppose. You know.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Oh well, that's amazing. So, what's next after this book?
Oh my goodness, who knows? I'm so, you know, the usual excitement of freelance life. I'm doing more radio stuff. I'm actually doing a documentary later this year about T.S. Eliot for Radio 4. So that's kind of going off into, you know, highbrow stuff, you know.
What's your angle on T.S. Eliot?
What's my angle?
What's your angle? You found out something.
Said like a real commissioning editor. So I'm
sorry, I'm just interested.
I'm doing I'm actually kind of going back to my undergraduate thesis, my alternative life as a T.S. Eliot academic instead of a pop.
Oh right, you're just dusting off the thesis.
Dusting it off. No, not. It's long out of date.
But mortarboard back out.
Yeah, exactly. No, but going up, I was always really interested in him. It's at this is the centenary of the publication of The Wasteland in December.
Oh right, okay.
So I'm doing a piece about all the strange and wonderful women who influenced that poem. You know, I'm going into historical archives. I'm going to do interviews. I'm going to places where there are barmaids and Austrian, you know, kind of not members of royalty, people connected to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there's all these interesting characters that give you an interesting picture of what life was like in the 1920s. So I'm doing that,
right?
And basically, I'm on tour. It's quite exciting.
I'm presuming you're doing lots of literary festivals talking about this book.
Yeah, I'm doing Hay, which is very exciting and also very handy because it's 35 minutes drive from here. I'm doing a festival called Kite, which is a really lovely new festival, and some with Saint Etienne and Self-Esteem playing. So, you know, Jude Heaven. Loads of little bits and bobs, really. Kind of Sea Change in Totnes, go and see Roy Wilkinson, you know, words great writer, and and you know, chucking on, doing my folk column for The Guardian and just writing the usual stuff. So
well, more power to you, Jude.
Absolutely.
Power.
Yeah.
So this book, which we got proof copies of, are you still on the cover in the final? In the final version. It
doesn't have a title on it, but there it is. It will have a title.
It's got a title on the side. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, the final copy. I've got a quote from Ian Rankin on the front, so I'm very excited.
Oh, brilliant!
About that.
Oh right, good.
I didn't
And when's it
comes-
out, Jude? Is it early? Is it late April? I can't remember now.
It's coming out on the 28th of April. My son's 8th birthday, so I'm not allowed to have a launch party on his birthday. So I'm having one the day after, which is my birthday. So it's going to be a brilliant party, hopefully, COVID's permitting.
So Jude's going on tour, and what was it you talked about? The dopamine pathway. Is that what you're talking about?
That's right.
Two more from them after the news, I think.
Audio cheesecake. 2 more from them as well.
All the very best.